supper with Danny and what that might entail. I hope not, was all he could answer. Caleb leaned down and kissed Andrew's jaw. He won't, I promise. And you know how I feel about promises. Yeah, you've been great at keeping them. That's the plan. You need someone you can count on, and I want that someone to be me. Andrew took a moment to process that. I do, which is strange because I normally don't. He laughed at himself. See? I'm confused. Nothing to be confused about. I'll keep proving myself to you until you have to give in, and believe me, I won't let you down. Andrew pressed his body to Caleb's and held him tight. I hope not. They stood there, wound around each other, for a long minute. Caleb pulled away and held Andrew at arm's length. You look better. Not so shaken up. What can I say? You're a steadying influence. Caleb grinned. Yeah, I get that often. Andrew chuckled and punched him lightly in the ribs. Uh-huh, I'm sure you do. A sharp knock at the door pulled their attention away from each other. Caleb opened it, and Jed stood on the other side. Alpha wants to see you both. Caleb waited for Andrew to meet him at the door, and they walked back downstairs together. Alphonse stood beside a chair in the living room. Danny sat slumped in it, his face pale, running his hands shakily over his head. Daniel, Alphonse said, I'm sorry, Andrew. I'll pay you back what I stole. Mr. DiMartino is giving me a job, and we're going to set it up so that some of my check every week goes straight to you. His brother looked up at Alphonse, who nodded his approval. Good. Now that's settled, Andrew. Do you mind if Daniel stays in your apartment for a few days? It seems his current living conditions aren't compatible with his new way of life. Andrew blinked. He opened his mouth and snapped it shut again. What? Caleb nudged his arm. Oh, sure. He shook off his shock and went to stand beside his brother. Are you okay? No, Andy, I'm really not. Guess I didn't realize it until now. I almost got you killed. That's as close to rock bottom as I ever want to be. Almost is way too close, you know. That's not what I wanted. I just wasn't thinking. Alphonse patted Danny's shoulder. But you don't have to worry about that now. We have a support system, and we're going to get you straightened out. That's what Andrew wants, I'm sure. Andrew nodded. That's all I've ever wanted, Danny. You can do this, if you put your mind to it. I will. Alphonse patted him again. Jed's going to take Daniel to his place to pack up and drop him off at your apartment. He'll also be returning Mark to his home. I believe we have this situation under control. Jed followed still shaky Danny to the door. He looked over his shoulder at Andrew. I really am sorry, Andy. I know. We'll get through this. Danny nodded and went to stand by the front door. Jed went upstairs to retrieve Mark. Alphonse walked over to Andrew and gripped his chin. He tilted Andrew's head to the side and sniffed his neck. No bite yet? Andrew shook his head, but Alphonse was looking at his son. Caleb shrugged. Not the right time. We'll get there. You have amazing control, son. What does that mean? You're going to bite me? Why? With the obsession with the neck, Andrew hadn't processed the fact that it was a definite going to happen versus might happen. I'll explain it later, love. Pop, any word from Uncle Giovanni? He'll be here shortly. We should discuss our plan. Andrew noticed the tension in both of their mouths, the pinched expression in Alphonse's eyes. I'll just go upstairs and let you guys get this worked out, Caleb. That works. I'll be up soon. Andrew left the father and son to their discussion. He wished he didn't understand the power of family betrayal, but he did. He was thankful that Alphonse seemed to have gotten through to Danny, hoped that his guidance took and he changed his ways. Lost in his thoughts, Andrew didn't hear anyone when he shut the bedroom door until a hand clutched his throat, and someone growled in his ear. If I can't get my cousin, I guess you'll have to do. Andrew didn't pause to think. He simply screamed Caleb's name. Chapter 9. Mario tightened his hold on Andrew's neck and jerked his head to the side. He pulled him toward the far wall and put his back against it. Andrew tried to get out of his hold, but Mario squeezed tighter, cutting off his airflow. He heard yells and footsteps running up the stairs. The bedroom door burst open and Caleb ran through. He skidded to a stop when he saw Andrew in Mario's hold. Alphonse and Monty followed, steps behind. "Let him go," Caleb growled. His eyes began to shift to that deep gold. Andrew shivered. Alphonse stepped closer. "Mario, drop your hold, now." "I'm not going to, Uncle. I'll kill him, I swear. I will." "Boy, you don't want to do that." "What have I got to lose? You're going to tell my father everything. Then what? What happens to me? I was trying to help, but he won't get that, will he? I'll be out, and you and Caleb will still have everything." Caleb's features began to shift. "Caleb, hold," Alphonse barked. Monty stepped to the side, and the three wolves triangled in front of Andrew. He couldn't keep his eyes on all three of them at once, which meant Mario couldn't either. He stared at Caleb, waiting for some sign, some hint of what he should do. Warm breath drifted over his exposed neck. "Maybe I should just bite him myself, huh, cousin?" Caleb rushed forward, but Alphonse stopped him. "Let him go." Caleb's voice was so low and deep, Andrew had never heard the ice in him like he had in his alpha father. But Caleb had it in him too. The pack structure became clearer. Caleb was more than just Alphonse's heir in the familial sense. He would become alpha, might already be one for all Andrew understood. Mario trembled at the power in his cousin's voice. "I can't do that. But maybe, just maybe, if I make him mine, you won't do whatever it is you're thinking of doing to me. Can't hurt me, then, can you? Not if he's at stake." More footsteps and a stranger appeared at the door. Short and stocky, with the same white hair and dark skin as Alphonse. Mario's father, the mysterious uncle. "Mario, son, what are you doing?" "Saving myself, Dad. Not going to let them beat us. I'm going to make sure we get what we deserve." Alphonse snarled at his brother. "Control your son, Giovanni, or I will." Mario's mouth opened against Andrew's neck. Andrew met Monty's eyes and looked quickly to the side. Monty nodded. Andrew didn't wait for more reassurance. He jabbed his elbow into Mario's stomach and pushed away. Monty grabbed him and jerked him out of the way. Andrew hit the wall, hard. It stunned him for a moment, and when he turned around again, Caleb had shifted and had Mario pinned to the ground. The wolf's hackles were standing straight up, his teeth bared. He growled low and closed his mouth around Mario's throat. "Caleb, don't!" Andrew couldn't believe the others just stood there, letting this happen. No one moved, said a word. Caleb raised his head and growled at Andrew. He shrunk back from the threat of that gaze. Caleb raised his front paw and slashed it across Mario's face. Mario screamed as blood flooded down his face. He covered the wound with his hand. Caleb stepped back and howled. Alphonse knelt at his son's side. "Enough now. Where's your mark?" Caleb didn't seem satisfied. He tried to leap forward again, but Alphonse grabbed the fur of his neck and slammed him to the ground. "Boy, I said enough." His voice sent trembles through everyone else in the room. Mario whimpered. Monty and Giovanni dropped to their knees. Caleb growled, but Alphonse didn't let him go, just pushed him harder to the ground. "Shift," Alphonse commanded. Caleb shuddered, and his body began the transformation back to human. He stood up in a puddle of his clothes. He snarled again, and Alphonse grabbed him by the throat. "Son, use some of that control I praised you earlier." Alphonse gave him a shake. "Check your mate." Caleb swiveled his head around until he saw Andrew. He stomped across the room and pulled Andrew against him. Andrew tilted his neck to the side, his instincts guiding him. Caleb groaned and buried his face against the spot where Mario's mouth had been. Caleb licked over it. Andrew shivered. "That's kind of disgusting. And hot. But stop, because your dad and uncle are right here." Caleb shook against him, and Andrew realized he was laughing. Andrew poked him in the side. "Stop laughing at me. Licking is not acceptable in front of your father." Get me? They separated, and Caleb looked Andrew up and down. His gaze heated, but he turned back to his father. He's fine, he said, and released a long breath. You in control again? I am. Caleb wrapped an arm over Andrew's shoulders and pulled him close. Caleb, I want to look at Mario's face, see what I can do to help him. Andrew stiffened, ready to be rebuked and to stand his ground. He couldn't let the man lay there bleeding, no matter what he'd done. Alphonse stepped between Andrew and Mario, blocking his view. Andrew, you can't do that. This is one of those times where you need to take what I say and not argue. Mario challenged Caleb for you. Caleb won. These are the consequences, and Mario must deal with his injury. He turned to Giovanni and crossed his arms over his chest. What are we going to do about your son? Because as of today, he is no longer my nephew. Andrew reached out, wanting to stop Alphonse from cutting Mario off, but Caleb grasped his hand and entwined their fingers. I know you don't understand, but please, you have to let Pop handle this. Mario knew what would happen if he failed. Andrew looked down at Caleb's cousin, still lying on the floor. He appeared to be in shock, his breathing fast but shallow. His eyes were closed, but Andrew could see them moving under his eyelids. Andrew was certain he'd need to process this for a while. Caleb, I'd really like to go back to my apartment now. You stay here and deal with your uncle and cousin. Maybe Monty can take me, or I can call a cab. Caleb frowned, starting to deny his request. Andrew shook his head. No, this is when you don't argue with me. I need to go home. I want to help Danny get set up, and I need some space. Okay. Caleb didn't seem to know what else to say. There wasn't much he could do. Alphonse nodded to Monty, and the guard led the way to the door. The ride back to Andrew's apartment didn't take long. Monty walked him upstairs and looked around the apartment before going back to the door. You know he did what he had to do. Don't hate him for that. I don't hate him, Andrew answered. I just have to decide how much of this I can accept. There are a lot of rules that I don't agree with. What am I committing myself to if I make a commitment to Caleb? Monty grunted. Think about it. That's all I'm saying. I will, thanks, Monty. Take care of him for me? Yeah. The guard shut the door, and when Andrew didn't move to lock up, he opened it again and glared. Lock it. Andrew laughed. He closed the door, flipped the deadbolt, and slid the chain in place. Done. He heard another grunt before the guard's heavy steps sounded on the stairs. An hour or so later, Jed dropped Danny off. He and Andrew sat up talking for hours. His brother wasn't completely reformed, by any means, but Alphonse seemed to have opened his eyes. He'd given him an entry-level position at his company, and neither one of them even knew what the company was. One more detail to add to Andrew's growing list of too much, too fast. He cared about Caleb, more than he probably should considering the differences in their lives. They dived right into their relationship without any thought as to how to make those differences work for and not against them. The sunrise behind the mountains drew Andrew out of his thoughts. He curled up in the chair by the window and stared out at the night, long after Danny had gone to bed. His thoughts swirled in circles, with Caleb always in the center. He hadn't even noticed the sky lightening until the orange glow began to creep up and light the morning. With a groan, he stood up and stretched his